Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rachel Vasquez and I'm on the marketing team here at Jobvite. Before we get started with our webinar for recruitment benchmarks to measure ROI, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, especially our current Jobvite and Appcast customers. Hello. First, you'll notice that all lines have been muted to avoid background noise. However, we would still love to have your questions, so if you want to use the chat box at the bottom of the Ready Talk panel, we'll be monitoring it throughout the presentation and saving your questions until the end. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to tell you why tracking your data matters more than ever before. We're also going to dive into the 4 recruitment benchmarks to measure ROI, click to apply rate, cost per quality applicant, source of applicants, and time to hire. With that, I'd like to introduce Chris Forman.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name's Chris Forman. I'm the founder and CEO of Appcast. I am looking at the folks that are coming into the webinar right now and smiling. There are a number of very familiar names, so it's nice to be talking to some friends and colleagues from the recruiting space. A little bit of background. I've been building technology, recruiting technology specifically, for the last 20 years. I ran a company called Ayers, was the Chief Technology and Development Officer at The Right Thing, and then more recently started Startwire and Appcast. Startwire is a company that helps job seekers get updates in their job applications using a nifty free web application. It's got about 10 million users. And Appcast, I'll tell you about a bit in a second. This is, Matt and I seemingly make this date a couple times a year. We talk quite a bit about things that we think are important to talent acquisition professionals, and hopefully it's going to be valuable for you. As a number of you do know, I mix the incredibly symbiotic things of building recruiting technology and shoveling cow manure. I live on a small farm in New Hampshire that has cows, pigs, sheep, and chickens, as well as 4 kids and dogs. And I'm thankful my wife still puts up with me. A little bit about Appcast. We're a 50-person, actually more than that now, software company based right near Dartmouth College that makes technology that in essence, as the tagline says, make job ads work. We've got 3 products, about 650 customers. The most popular product in the employer space is a platform called Exchange that allows employers, especially those using Jobvite, to, in essence, purchase recruitment media across the entire web, across all the major job boards, as well as search, social, and display sites on a pay-per-applicant basis rather than paying per click or per posting. We've got an enterprise software suite called ClickCast that is predominantly used by recruitment advertising agencies and large job boards to optimize their cost per click job ad buying. So if you, in essence, spend more than $500,000 a month buying cost per click advertising from places like Indeed or Glassdoor or ZipRecruiter or Jobs to Careers, close to 65% of that marketplace subscribes to ClickCast to help them manage that spend. And lastly, brand new product that we just launched is Appcast Brand. It's a brand advertising platform for recruiters that allows you to target really powerful display brand advertising to people that have completed applications on your website so that you can tell them about how great a place it is to work. You can retarget people that have started an application, let's say on Jobvite, but have not actually completed it. So this is very similar to what they do in consumer advertising in terms of shopping cart abandonment work. And then also there's something called audience extension where you can go really reach out to passive candidates on the web, whether they be truck drivers or cooks or software developers, and talk to them about how great a place you are to work. So that's us, and that's me. So Matt?
All right, thanks, Chris. Yeah, and it's always a pleasure working with Chris. Really fun guy, interesting background. Love the stuff that Appcast is doing, and couples really well with Jobvite and our solutions. I'll just talk briefly about my background and sort of how it relates to recruiting. So I've spent the last 15 years in sales and marketing, and the last 10 of those working for various software companies. Human Concepts, which makes the Org Plus product, part of Saba, and then SuccessFactors for a number of years, and was particularly interested in the recruiting piece of that. And so joined Jobvite about 4 years ago. And I think that the big parallels that I see between marketing folks and recruiting folks is sort of this evolution of our functions, and the parallels are really interesting, and I think data is what has driven that. So I'm sure most of you are kind of aware of the CHRO position being relatively new, sort of last 10 to 15 years, that individual earning a seat on the executive team, and something similar happened a few years prior with chief marketing officers. And so I think that what's driven that change has been data, and accountability I think is really driven by data. And so having systems like the Appcast and Jobvite and so many others out there that empower us in the HR and marketing space with data to justify the investments that we're making has been a big part of our evolution. And so that's kind of my perspective on the recruiting space and how marketing and recruiting sort of have evolved in parallel. And then as far as Jobvite as an organization, you can see sort of the way we view it is top of funnel, bottom of funnel, or you could think about it in terms of pre-apply and post-apply. And so the stuff that they're doing at Appcast is really optimizing getting folks into the top of that funnel. And then our software is really focused on, once they're in that funnel, driving them effectively through the process. And so we have a suite of applications that address these various stages of the funnel. I won't go through them all individually, but things like the career site, both mobile and desktop. We have a product called Jobvite Engage to run campaigns and build talent pools for those passive job seekers. The ability to do social referrals and job distribution through social networks, and then an ATS, video screening, and an onboarding product. And we've really seen that evolution as well with the shift of onboarding moving from the HR function to the recruiting function. So with that, I've mentioned kind of the importance of data and how I really think data is what drives the the empowerment of teams. And so we'll start off with a stat to kind of stay true to form. And so you can see here from our Recruiter Nation report from the end of last year, the recruiters that we polled, and we do this every year, a couple thousand recruiters, and then in the spring we do a couple thousand job seekers. We just launched the job seeker survey this week. But from the Recruiter Nation report, you can see that recruiters do not see the market getting any easier. So basically all the recruiters with a 5% margin of error feel that hiring is going to continue to get more competitive. And so, a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about are ways that we think that you can differentiate yourselves as well as optimize your spend. And so some of the reasons that were cited, and this is from SHRM's Talent Landscape Survey, but I think in terms of why recruiters feel that way, so you can see here that over half of the recruiters polled were seeing a lower number of applicants, increased competition, and then specifically in that kind of knowledge worker or skilled worker side of the business, there's this focus on a lack of skilled candidates that have that necessary set of technical skills. And then the fourth is the piece around the competition in local markets. And so recruiters are increasingly looking to other markets, the idea of contract work and remote work to help address some of the talent challenges that they're facing.
So, so thanks, Matt. And so, one of the things that, the stats that Matt just, kind of laid out, kind of paint a picture of is that there's a feeling, a strong feeling within the talent acquisition community in the United States that it's getting harder to recruit as the unemployment rate goes down. We're at historic lows. We're back into that too often used term of a war for talent. Now, it feels that way. And interestingly, if you look at the data that exists at, kind of both a macro and a micro level. So at the broad U.S. economic level, as well as in the micro level of particular industries or particular companies. There's data that supports that assessment and view, and then there's data that cuts across it. And I think that's we decided to throw in this stat as kind of a counterpoint. Is that a lot of recruiters are feeling that it's tighter, but interestingly, when push comes to shove, and you talk to folks in talent acquisition, outside of the broad benchmarks that exist in the economy, such as the unemployment rate, oftentimes it's hard to put a finger on data that is showing it's becoming harder, it's becoming more difficult. There's fewer folks kind of getting through the end of the funnel, and the reason why recruiters and recruiting leaders aren't necessarily as data driven or utilize data as much as some of their colleagues in other kind of frontline positions, let's say in marketing or in sales, is not because the people aren't data driven, the process is inherently not something that's data driven. I actually think that it has to do with the fact that recruiters have an extraordinarily difficult and multi-threaded job. And I'm not playing to the audience here, guys. I'm being really honest. You have 75 bosses. I mean, you've got the vice president of recruiting who you work for, or the chief human resource officer. Then you've got every single hiring manager whose rec you're supporting, and then you've got the candidates as well. And we rarely think about the candidates as being the boss of me in this process, as it were. But each one of those constituencies, HR leadership, hiring managers, and job seekers are major stakeholders in this process, and you have to keep them all happy, on top of the fact that your business process that you're working through is completely complex and multi-threaded. And so unlike somebody, like if you're in sales, your job is to go sell a product, and it's pretty linear. And if you're in marketing, it's fairly linear. In fact, there's a lot of specialization that occurs. If you are in operations or you're in manufacturing, things tend to be fairly linear. Recruiters are forced into a situation where they have to be masters of all the trades. And that's really, really hard to do, and that creates a lot of complexity. And I believe is one of the reasons why sometimes it's hard to bring data into the conversation when you're looking at talent acquisition. And so what Matt and I are endeavoring to do is to provide a construct, and a simple construct, and some benchmark data to start to break down some of the key things that you as recruiting leaders and recruiting professionals, practitioners, want to start to measure and manage and track. And I think that the construct that Matt provided in terms of top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel is really, really important. And the stuff that I'm going to be talking about specifically is going to be at the top of the funnel. This is where our partnership with Jobvite and the work that we've done since literally we founded the business. Jobvite was, I think, our first one of, if not our first, kind of applicant tracking partners, and we've developed an incredibly deep relationship. It's allowed us to really kind of bring to bear some neat data. So where I want to start is actually on a bit of a geeky, tactical, kind of piece of benchmark data, and that's what I call a click-to-apply rate. So the click-to-apply rate measures the percentage of job seekers that click from a job ad on a job site or a job aggregator to the beginning of your application process on Jobvite, and what percentage, or any applicant tracking system, and what percentage of those people actually complete the application. So Appcast, because of our install base and our customer base, and the fact that our bidding software is used by the vast majority of recruitment advertising agencies and job boards in the United States, has a massive, massive store of data. Literally every single day, we are tracking millions and millions and millions of job clicks and apply conversion, what marketers would call events. And so we've been able to boil the ocean and kind of benchmark what the standards happen to be in this area. The reason why this is really important is that you spend money every single day, whether it is direct or indirect cash, to get to build an employer brand, to do marketing, to buy job ads, to get people to come to your website, review jobs that you have open, and apply for those jobs. If more of those people actually that have intent, meaning that they came to your career site, they navigated to a job, actually complete the application, in the long run, you will spend less money if you have more of those people, complete the funnel. In the e-commerce world, if somebody comes to your site and navigates and says, I want to buy a toaster, you will sell a lot more toasters if you get more people that click the buy button to actually get all the way through and give you a credit card. So what we've got here is we've got some really interesting benchmark data, and it's looking at click-to-apply rate by device. So on average, across all the applicant tracking systems that we track, and this also includes home-hosted pages, on average, 7.5% of the people that click from an external site where a job description is being posted and get to your applicant tracking system actually complete the apply. The number goes up when you just look at people that are on a desktop, and the number goes down when you actually look at folks that are on a mobile device. And this mobile device percentage has gone up sharply in the last year, because a lot of folks in the talent acquisition world have gotten religion about understanding the fact that close to 50% of their job seeker traffic now is on a mobile device. And if they can't accept applications via a mobile device, they're missing out on a ton of great applicants. So here's what the standards are. If you are if you're interested in understanding what your click-to-apply rate is as a Jobvite customer, we can actually help you do that. It doesn't cost anything. We can drop an Appcast conversion tag on your site, and you would be able to measure these instantly and see where you benchmark. The other thing that's interesting is that we started to we took all the jobs that our platform manages and understands on a click-to-apply rate, and we started to break it down by function. And we wanted to see which functions had the highest click-to-apply rate. And what you see here actually makes some sense, and this was fascinating. On the left-hand side where you see the highest click-to-apply rates, that means more people are, of the people that clicked from an online job ad to get to your applicant tracking system, more people are actually completing the apply process. The functions are restaurant, customer service, admin, clerical. What do those jobs have in common? Well, they tend to be jobs that job seekers who are shopping for a position based on shift availability, location, and shift differential, hourly rate. That's where they end up playing. And the logic here is that, let's say you are looking for a new job along your bus route. There's a Target on one side of the road, and there's a Walmart on the other side of the road. You're working at Walmart, and all of a sudden Target, your friend that now works over at Target says they're paying 50 cents an hour or $1 an hour more, and they've got a lot more shifts that aren't at night and on the weekends. You will actually, because that's kind of the only employment opportunity on your bus route, you'll take the time to go through the most atrocious online application process out there, because you really want to work at that place, and that represents your big opportunity. Well, if you have more choice, all of a sudden, you may be less likely to go through a non-optimal online application process. So again, really kind of interesting benchmarks here. And what I want you to do is I want you to take those two things, the device-based click-to-apply rate averages and the function click-to-apply rate averages, and I want you to put them in a box for a second. We're going to come back to them. The next thing that I want to kind of talk about here is how to look at what you pay for recruitment media on a cost per click and a fully calculated cost per applicant basis when you buy job ads. So probably everybody on this phone has heard of Indeed. And Indeed, back in mid-2000s, popularized a new way of buying recruitment advertising. Rather than paying for a posting that would be on a site for 30 days, they they brought the Google advertising model to jobs. So you only pay when somebody actually looks or clicks on your job ad. And Indeed has exploded excuse me, as a business. If you read online, I remember when it was a handful of people, and I believe there's sources online that say that they grew to $780 million in revenue last year, and they're still growing at double-digit percentages this year. So if you think about it, more than $1 billion probably is being spent just with one company right now, one click at a time, in recruitment advertising. So these are some industry-wide standards on what a cost per click is. Now, this is something that as they say, it's either Winston Churchill or Mark Twain. People argue about this, but there are three types of lies in the world: lies, damn lies, and statistics. So this is an aggregate number. So if all of a sudden you're looking at this and saying, hey, I paid way under that or I paid way over that, there's probably a reason for it. These are industry average. This is kind of a broad average across the United States. But what you're seeing here is basically the average CPC in the United States on a job ad is about 55 cents. But if you dig deeper, you can start to see that the CPCs, and this makes sense, vary based on function. There are some verticals, like transportation, that are highly competitive, where the average cost per clicks are significantly higher than, let's say, in the retail world, where there's a lot more people that click on those ads in retail that can apply for those jobs than there are in the transportation space. And so you see a lot of price differentiation there. The reason why this is important is that when you take your click-to-apply rate and you take what you're actually paying for that click, and again, whether you're buying on the click or it's a computed cost per click, where you say, all right, if I buy a $100 job posting and I know I get 100 clicks on that ad, it's $1 a click. These are the things that allow you to characterize how much you are actually paying for an applicant. And if you can understand that, you can start to make business decisions around how to improve your costs. If you say, okay, I'm on average paying 50 cents per click, and I've got a 10% click-to-apply rate, I'm paying $5 per applicant, and I'm getting 1,000 applicants a month, paying about $5,000 a month. What would happen if I undertook an initiative to increase my click-to-apply rate by 50%, so that I got my click-to-apply rate up to 15%? How much money would I save? You can actually build a business case around that. Or alternatively, you could say, well, next year when I go into budgeting, I know that I'm paying the market average, but I want to start to negotiate and see if I can pay 20% below the market average, because it's going to actually deliver candidates to me at this price, which I believe is more important. So this has, if you improve your click-to-apply rate or you improve what you pay on your CPC, it dramatically impacts what your overall sourcing costs are going to be. So what are some of the key things? If you wanted to improve your click-to-apply rate, if you wanted to get more people completing the application, how do you do that? It's not black magic. The first thing is, and this shouldn't be rocket science to anybody, is shorten your job application. If you have a job application that takes less than 5 minutes to complete, you have a 385. You get your click-to-apply rate increases by 385% compared to online applications that take more than 15 minutes to complete. Okay. The second thing that you want to do is you want to choose great applicant tracking systems like Jobvite. And this isn't, kind of playing to the audience here. Jobvite has spent a lot of time optimizing both its mobile and desktop apply processes so that technically it is very, very good. And there's a massive differentiation between applicant tracking platforms that make it easy for job seekers to apply and those that make it hard. So interestingly, people don't necessarily do this math when they're looking at an ATS. They're saying, does it have online interviewing? Maybe does it have video stuff? Does it do this? Does it do that? Are the buttons pink? Are they blue? But if they actually asked in the RFP process or in the sales process, what's your average click-to-apply rate? There are major applicant tracking systems out in the market today that have a 2.5% click-to-apply rate. When you compare that to the average of 7.5%, that I shared with you, that means candidates cost 3 times more through that ATS than average. Massive difference. And then lastly, kind of optimizing for mobile and making sure that your platform can actually upload resumes easily. It looks nice. It's mobile friendly. Again, Jobvite's kind of taken a great role in leading in that area. But it's in the first point, I've got a couple graphs here that I want to share with you. Besides shortening your application length itself, making sure that if you're asking questions in your online application, that those are really important questions to ask because you don't want to ask ones that you don't need to ask because it makes it longer to fill out. The other thing that's really interesting is there's a relationship between job title length and job description length and click-to-apply rate. It's almost like there's in both of these, there's a happy medium where if your job title tends to be too short, it's got a low click-to-apply rate. If it's too long, it definitely is not a good thing. So it needs to be just the right size. And if you have a job title that is accurate and is easy to read and is easy to index by the job sites, and it's 51 to 60 characters, that's the sweet spot for a job title to be. And if you're looking at job descriptions, there's also a very clear sweet spot. You want to be under 1,000 words. If you're under 1,000 words, it is something that a job seeker gets enough information so that they can evaluate the job, but not too much that that it bores them and they move on to something else. So those are some. If you want to improve your conversion rates, you can look at job titles, you can look at job descriptions, you can look at the length of your application, you can ensure it's mobile, and you can, let's see here, I forgot my fourth one here, and you can make sure you got a great ATS that has a good click-to-apply rate. And then on the CPC side, there's a couple things. The first one is just knowing your industry pricing. A lot of job sites that charge on a cost-per-click basis will go into an employer, and the employer will say, yeah, I love this idea of only paying when somebody clicks on my job. But, God, that seems complex. That seems really, really hard. Can I just give you $1,000 a month and have you basically make those bids for me? And, of course, they say, sure, no problem at all. What ends up happening is that, and I don't think anything nefarious is being done here, per se, but what I am saying is that you're never going to pay a competitive price if that happens. You will probably always, and this is borne out by data, pay an average CPC or an above average cost per click. So if you know what those CPC averages are, which in this report, we shared them with you, and anyone who gets these slides at the functional level, you'll be able to see them. In fact, here they are. This is market-based CPC pricing for different functions. Just knowing that and being able to bring that to the sales process is incredibly valuable. And then the other part of this, so first bid smart. Don't be bidding 80 cents a click for your restaurant jobs. bid 80 cents a click just for your trucking jobs. And then the other part of it is run lots of tests. And what I mean by that is that everybody thinks that all job sites are the same. The reality is job sites are not the same. They all have different technology stacks. All of their marketplaces work differently. And so what a bid on one site that may be perfect for getting you what you want may be absolutely the wrong bid on another site. So you want to run as many tests as possible to say, oh, if I bid 50 cents on this site, this is how many clicks and how many applies I get. What happens if I bid 70 cents? And do the same thing on the next site, do the same thing on the next site. One of the things that you will learn from marketers is that if you ask them a question, they never give you the answer. They just say something along the lines of, well, that's a neat idea. Let's go test it. Because what was true 6 months ago may not be true now. And here's a little factoid. And this is, I think, the most interesting stat that I'm going to share with you today, and I'm almost done with my statistical overload, is there is an incredibly important relationship between when a job site gets jobs and when how many applies get driven and how many people get hired. So at one of our sister sites, we did some research where we found that 28% of people hired applied within the first 2 days. 50% of people hired applied within the first 5 days. And that number, jumped up to close to 70% when you look at people that applied within, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. And so we titled this research, "The Early Bird Gets the Job." And it's the reason that we theorize that people that apply early in the process are more likely to get hired is that the way most applicant tracking systems are set up and most recruiting processes are set up is that you start in reverse date order. So if someone applies if the job gets open on Monday and a recruiter starts going through the applications on Wednesday to fill their slate of candidates for phone interviews, they start at the beginning and they go until they have enough people to fill that slate. Then they stop. If any of those candidates fall out, then they go back and they look at some more new candidates that are coming in. And so there's this massive, massive advantage to applying early. And for job sites, there's a massive advantage to being sure that your applicants get there early so that you can get credit for the hire. Okay? And so if you take a look in the bottom right-hand corner here, some publishers, especially job aggregators that basically scrape jobs off of your site, are some of the first ones to go ahead and get the job, which means even if the applies come from their free aggregator traffic, the likelihood that those people will get hired is significantly higher than, let's say, a niche site or a secondary site that you use, and you only use when, let's say, you've been advertising the job for a couple weeks and you haven't found anybody that you're looking for. And so here's some research that we did that basically looks at the time it takes for a publisher to get the job, a job board to get the job, to its first click. And so there are some sites out there, especially niche and mid-level sites that are sometimes not part of your sponsor all the job inventory. They're getting these jobs like days and days, sometimes weeks later. And if you're evaluating those sites based on the number of hires they generate, interestingly, you are putting them at a disadvantage. It's basically starting a 100-yard dash with half the people at the 50-yard line and half the people at the beginning of the race. So, all right. And then the last thing to kind of optimize what's going on is to use all this information to calculate cost, not necessarily at the hire, I would argue, but at the cost per quality applicant. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of reasons why somebody might not hire someone. They came in late in the process, the hiring manager cancels the requisition. But you should be able to do a really good analysis on how many qualified applications are driven by a particular source and evaluate your candidates on that metric. Okay, so if your ears are not yet bleeding with all of the data that I've just given, my friend Matt is going to try and finish the job here with some really interesting data from Jobvite about sources of applicants and hires. Matt?
Great, thank you, Chris. And yeah, just to close out on the Appcast stuff and to kind of do a shameless plug for Appcast, I'm definitely a fan of the technology. I mean, as a marketer, the predictability of the pipeline, which is ultimately what Chris's organization is helping with, is something that we really wrestle with, and I'm sure you guys as recruiters do as well. I mean, nothing would make me happier than to find out that Google is offering some cost per lead rather than a cost per click. And so, having the option to be able to add some predictability into the cost per applicants is I think really great technology, and is very relevant to what we're talking about, because the way we look at it is there's really only two controllable variables in the hiring process. One is the cost per hire, the other is the time to hire, and then obviously you guys as recruiters are trying to use that spidey sense to figure out the quality of the hire. But quality isn't necessarily something that we can teach, but we can do a lot to help with the cost per hire as well as the time to hire. So what we're going to do is kind of broaden the discussion beyond just the job boards, although that is always going to be a large source of applicants. And Chris talked about how the technology with Appcast will enable you to predict the costs per applicant. But what we do is, because we are an applicant tracking system and have the metrics all the way through to see where the hires are actually coming from, we can take that one step forward. And there's a number of ways that you can look at this data. We launched a benchmark report a couple of weeks ago, and I would encourage you guys to all download that. You can grab it off of our website. We're not going to go through the entire thing, but it does highlight every stage of the funnel so that you can benchmark yourselves, both with that top of funnel stuff that Chris talked about, as well as the conversion rates all the way through things like applications to interviews, interviews to offers, and offers to hires. But in this slide, what we're looking at is we're comparing where the applies are coming from where your actual hires are coming from. So you can see here that the percentage of applications is actually over half driven by the job boards, but you're only hiring around 18% of those people. So the great thing with this is that Appcast provides a way to optimize that spend. I wouldn't want you guys to misinterpret this slide to suggest, I'm not making good hires from the job boards. It's simply saying the conversion rate from applies to hires is lower than in some of the other categories. So you really should be looking at ways to optimize that spend, and Appcast is one of the ways to do that. But the other piece, converse to that, is referrals would be one, and internal hires would be one that both jump out at me, right? They're teeny slivers on the apply side, but they represent nearly equivalent numbers of hires as does the job board. So, some things to think about is, what sort of internal mobility program do you have? How are you empowering your employees to, be able to learn about internal opportunities and apply for jobs and make those lateral moves, because it does represent, at most organizations, a significant percentage of the hires. And then the other one is the referrals, right? So I think we all know that referral hires are some of the best folks that you can bring into the organization. We call that the accountability factor here at Jobvite, right? These are folks who typically have some personal connection to someone within the organization, and that creates a higher level of accountability for those folks when they come into the company. My brother-in-law referred me for this job, and I don't want my sister to kick my butt, so I'm going to really work my tail off at this company. And the data backs that up as well. Our stats inside of Jobvite show that those folks have roughly 15% faster time to hire, stay 10 to 20% longer, and perform 10 to 20% higher on the performance reviews. So we've got some good stats to kind of back up that those are two key areas of actual sources of hire. So, it's just an opportunity to kind of look within your organization and be sure that you're doing the things necessary to empower both internal mobility as well as your referral program. So you can see here that it stack ranks them all, and as I've already talked about, right, the internal hires and referrals are the two biggest. The job boards, again, it's the percentage, and you can see the effectiveness rating, so you're comparing the number of applications versus the number of hires. And so again, I wouldn't look at this as best to worst. I would simply look at this just like I, as a marketer, would look at my source of leads. So one of the largest sources of leads for us are remarket ads. So similar to what Appcast offers for you guys as recruiters, those are those ads, with their brand product. Those are those ads that chase you around the internet and try to get you to come back, right? And those do really well for us in terms of the cost per lead. So we can find people at a relatively low cost. We may not get as many customers from those leads, but that's okay as long as we're able to run that program at a relatively low cost per lead. So back to the Appcast stuff, right? As long as you can maintain an effective use of that spend with the job boards, it isn't necessarily an ineffective channel. You just need to be spending the money effectively for it to work. And then the third one that I wanted to touch on, right below the green here, you can see the custom campaigns. And so this is relatively new, but it's definitely emerging as sort of the new channel within recruiting. And so we're starting to measure this. You can see that the hire count is relatively low, but the effectiveness is incredibly high. So what that tells us is that this whole campaigning concept is on the rise, and we're seeing that across the board. So thinking about how to build that passive pipeline, right? We've historically measured things, and Ed on the chat asked a question about this, and we'll cover it in more detail. But Ed's question was about, where does the hire, when we talk about time to hire, where does the clock start ticking? And we've historically, in the industry as well as here at Jobvite, measured that around the date that they first apply. But we're seeing that change quite a bit. And so the biggest shift has been in the amount of research that folks do before they apply. So with the emergence of things like Glassdoor, mobile career sites, social presence from companies, applicants are doing a ton of research before they actually apply for a job. And it's the same thing we're seeing in marketing. I think the latest study from Gartner showed that over 50% of the research is done by a buyer before they ever actually engage with a vendor. And the percentages are as high or higher, I would bet, in the recruiting space. And so it's just something to be thinking about in terms of your passive pipeline, right? What are you doing to keep a database of folks who haven't necessarily applied yet, or who applied for a job but didn't quite get it, the silver medalists, as we say? And then what are you doing to stay in touch with those folks through some sort of outbound marketing efforts, whether it's at least a periodic text-based email, and if you're more sophisticated, starting to leverage social media and HTML, web page campaigns. So those are some things to be thinking about in terms of where the applicants are coming from, where the hires are coming from, and then this shift from purely focusing on once they enter the funnel to thinking about pre-apply stuff like campaigns, as well as the stuff that Appcast is doing with the remarketing. So just to put some numbers behind these, so to kind of summarize those three slides, this will give you some stats to validate the effectiveness of the hiring. And so, as I mentioned, the internal hires, the referrals, and the custom campaigns, at least based on the benchmark of our couple thousand customers, is showing that these are the three most effective channels in terms of the number of hires that you're making versus the number of applies that you're getting. All right, so in terms of optimizing spend, so I talked a little bit about this, but just keep in mind, right, over 90% of your applicants are going to be covered just by the two channels of the job board and the career site. So those are two areas to really be thinking about optimization. If you look back at the percentages that Chris showed earlier, it's something like a 5% apply rate which is similar to what we have in marketing. We know that around 95% of the people who come to our pages to submit their information and get a white paper or an ebook or register for a webinar like this aren't going to actually fill out the form. So there's a huge opportunity there, right? So you should be looking at, as we've discussed, the job boards, how you're writing those descriptions. Are you optimizing your spend? Are you doing it on a cost per click or a cost per apply? And then for your career site, as Chris mentioned, and something we're big believers in here, is your site mobilely optimized? So can folks apply for a job on your site? And a subtle point here is that we've got a lot of career sites out there from competitors of ours that have a optimized career site, but you cannot apply for a job on a mobile device. And we would really discourage that, even for our own customers. Until you're ready to have a mobile apply, we would discourage you from having a mobile career site. Because if you think about it from a candidate's perspective, they're going to look at a job, become interested in that job, and then click to apply, and then have the form blow up and they can't finish the process. So it's a really bad candidate experience. So you want to approach that career site holistically and kind of do it all in one shot. So if you don't already have a mobilely optimized career site, when you do make that leap, you're going to want to be sure that your apply process is mobilely optimized as well. And then, the amount of steps. So he already covered this, so I won't go through it further, but it's just this idea that you want to make it easy to apply. The more forms that the more form fields they have to fill out, the lower apply rates you're going to get, as well as the requirement to create a profile. So we see huge drop-off with the applicant tracking systems that require a profile. So we haven't gotten it down to the one-click apply like you've got with Amazon, to buy with one click, but we do have it down to 2 clicks. So on a mobile device through Jobvite, you can apply with just 2 clicks, and so you can really optimize the amount of candidates you're getting and that conversion from viewing a page to actually applying for a job. All right, so over to time to hire. So that stuff was more about optimizing the spend. And then now we're going to talk for a couple of minutes about trying to optimize the time it takes to hire. And I'm sure you guys have seen some of these stats, and it varies depending on the job that you're applying for. But the idea of leaving seats empty within your organization, what does it cost your business to have an extra 10 days of an engineer not coding? Or a director of a department not managing his people or her people. And so those kinds of things have a huge impact on the bottom line. And so we'll talk briefly about some of that stuff. So the time to hire has actually gone down slightly. So you can see in 2015, it was 43-day time to hire. And this year it's 39 days. And again, we're only looking at our own customers. And so part of what we think is helping is this shift to less barriers to entry. So the mobilely optimized experience, the ability to apply with just 2 clicks, as well as the amount of additional research that folks are doing, as we talked about. So they're more ready to engage with you when they apply because they're just simply doing more research before before they actually submit an application or engage with your organization. And then the number of applications. So this is another one, and some of this I think really varies by organization, and the number of applies varies wildly, especially between urban and rural areas. We have customers in technology for engineering positions that receive over 1,000 applications per job. And so, I just wanted to kind of put a disclaimer here. There's a very wide variance on the number of applications per rec. And so this is relevant to a point I'll make later, which is that, you don't want to stop just at these broad-based metrics. It's a good starting point, but you really want to dive deeper because things like applications per hire for an engineering job are going to vary wildly, as I'm sure you guys know, from a job like a customer success position or say a retail position. So those are some things to think about, but you can see that the number is down. So on average we saw roughly 60 in 2015, and we're now seeing around 52 applies per job rec this year. All right, and so this one, may not be a surprise to you, but people are getting pickier, right? And so what we're seeing here is the conversion rate is down from offers. The amount of folks that make it from the interview to the offer, and so it could go both ways and really depend on what the individual is doing, whether or not it was on the offer side of you guys not wanting to proceed with that candidate or them excluding themselves from the process. But we saw roughly 90% of the folks converting from interview to offer in 2015, and that's now down to 83% this year. All right, so some ways to accelerate that, and we've talked about some of them through this process, right? It's obviously you want to optimize in the ways that Chris and I spoke about in terms of getting them into the funnel, but then accelerating them through that process. One big way is, as I mentioned, you want to drill into each stage of the funnel. So we talk about this both in marketing as well as in our product for recruiters in terms of the funnel bottlenecks, right? So you really want to drill into the different stages. You can find the benchmarks in our report and understand what the gaps may be. So comparing with the benchmarks, are there individual areas where you guys are seeing a gap in your performance versus that benchmark? So you may have a really good interview to offer, but have a bottleneck, say, in the applicants to interviews, and that could be due to things like a slow response time and engagement with the hiring managers. So definitely drill into the different stages of the funnel and try to figure out where you have room to optimize. And then the point I already made, right, with the campaigns is, really be thinking about how you can warm up candidates ahead of time. So your presence on Glassdoor, your presence on social media, as well as campaigning, right? So if you are using a tool like Jobvite, are you leveraging the ability to run those outbound campaigns and keep candidates warm and educate them about your organization? And at the very least, if you're just starting out with your campaigning, simply putting together a list in Excel and doing a quarterly text-based email out to folks to let them know about new jobs that are opening up, or expansion of a new office, or any philanthropic work that the company's working on. So even those baby steps can really help. And then, this parallel between SMART goals, right? I don't know if you guys know these acronyms with performance management and goal setting, but, data has obviously been the theme of this webinar, and the point we really want to make here is to make that experience for candidates a SMART one, right? And so be thinking about how you're able to measure every stage of the funnel. Be sure that you're setting attainable goals for yourself. So if you're not benchmarking in relative terms using our benchmark report, definitely be doing absolute benchmarks. So take a look at where you stand. So set an initiative, look at what your current benchmarks are, and set some attainable goals for yourself around getting some incremental improvement. And then lastly, it's really about data. So be sure that throughout this entire process, you're documenting, you're figuring out the data points, you're keeping track of the data points, and you're using those both in terms of managing up to the executive team to show them both the weaknesses and where you're improving, as well as holding the teams accountable. We talk a lot about it internally, and I think the best way to drive accountability within an organization, within our marketing efforts, within your guys' recruiting efforts, is around data, right? When you have facts to back up what's happening within the organization, it makes accountability much, much easier. All right, so Chris, you want to kind of close out on the two areas that you went over?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Sorry, I had mute on. We seemingly always have got some level of construction going on here, and so someone was seemingly using every tool imaginable to dig a hole above my head. Again, just to wrap up our talk, on the top of the funnel stuff, understanding and characterizing your click-to-apply rate, and understanding and benchmarking what you pay on a cost per click basis allows you to understand those two statistics allow you to calculate how much an applicant costs, your cost per application. So again, very simple. If it costs you 50 cents a click and 10% of your candidates make it through your process, you're going to be spending $5 for an applicant. But understanding that $5 per applicant is a valuable metric. But what's really, really important is to be able to evaluate your sources on how much it costs them to drive a quality applicant for you. And that's something that everybody's different. Everyone can define quality differently, but most of the time within an organization, you can define that to a standard. And as long as you hold that standard the same, quarter over quarter, you'll be able to create some great benchmarks. So hopefully that was helpful. That's all I got. But guys, thank you so much for the time today. Do we have questions?
Yeah, we do have a number of questions, I think, Rachel. Is that right?
Yes. One of our first questions is, how do I ensure this data reports accurately in my ATS and in my job advertising portals?
So the question was, how do we make sure that this data is recorded accurately?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. Well, on the front end of the funnel, understanding your clicks data and your conversion data, there's a couple ways to do it. One is the manual way, where you're downloading from all the different publishers that you're working with their click data and what they're charging you for those clicks, and then you're marrying that up with application data that comes from your ATS. There are platforms, we make them, that allow you to place a conversion tag on your applicant tracking system so that you can, using third-party software, almost kind of like Google Analytics, understand the clicks that you're getting from all your different sources, what you're paying, and how many applies are being driven. And so you can do that top of the funnel cost metric work. And then you would still have to marry it up with the conversion data from applicant to quality applicant to hire that would come from Jobvite. Matt, is that close to how you would answer it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that covers it. I think we had a question about the LinkedIn question from Suzanne. Okay, so Suzanne's asking, would LinkedIn be considered a job board or a career site? And so for us, and if you feel differently or have a different position, Chris, chime in. But for us, we consider the career site being where you can actually apply for the job. So the career site is hosted, usually by your applicant tracking vendor, and is on your, is a link on your own website. We view LinkedIn, and they're actually a customer, so they use us as their career site and for their applicant tracking system. But we view them as a job board, as we do Glassdoor. I mean, they provide other services, obviously, as well. But the job advertising is a huge part of their revenue and how they operate.
I agree.
Great. So besides the 4 main metrics discussed today, what other recruiting benchmarks are important to track?
So my answer. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, listen, I could fill a whiteboard with things to measure. I think that we've given you a perspective, on a few things to look at. I think that really the metrics that you decide to pay attention to are a function of 2 things. One, they accurately reflect and measure a critical part of the process that you are involved in. And number 2, they are something that you actually have control over. So what I mean by that is that if you're measuring something and there's nothing you can do about it, like knowing the information does not change your management, it may not be valuable to measure it. This is a doctor thing. They actually find that if they measure things that they can't do anything about, it lends itself to poorer medical decision making because it confuses the discussions that are going on. And so There's a ton of stuff that you can measure. The way that I would get down to it, and my email will be in the deck that gets sent out, and Matt is as well. Be happy to chat with you offline about what your recruiting objectives are and what you're trying to do and where you're trying to drive more value, because you've got a very large and complex business process. And so, there are elements of it that you can characterize, and there are elements of it that you can characterize and make a difference in, and those are the ones that you want to measure. So it's a non-answer answer. Sorry.
Yeah, and then the only thing I would add to that is, to start at a high level, if you're not sure what else to measure besides, obviously, cost per apply is critical with the work that they're doing at Appcast. And then just those standard 5 stages, which we have in that benchmark study, which are simply getting that cookie on your site either from your applicant tracking vendor, as we do for customers, or they've got this available at Appcast, so that you can understand how many folks are visiting your site, and of those, how many are applying. And then of the folks applying, how many are making it to interview, your interview to offer, and your offer to hire. And the reason I say that is because those are pretty standard stages. And to Chris's point, there's very specific things that you can do about each one. We don't have to go, we don't have time to go into all of them. But the other piece is that you have the benchmark data to understand how you're doing relative to other companies out there. So in addition to them being actionable, to Chris's point, I think it's also important to have those relative benchmarks so that you can understand how you're performing versus other recruiters around the country.
Great. And with that, we have one last question. If we didn't get the opportunity to actually answer your specific question today, don't worry. Someone will be following up with you, and by the end of this week, you should have both the recordings, both companies' reports, and as well as the slides. So with that, Chris, do you want to wrap up the last question? Someone asked, what is the difference between eCPA versus CPA?
Sure. A CPA is cost per applicant, and that is it's 2 things. It can be a metric, meaning how much does it cost to generate an application. It also can be a pricing model, meaning some platforms like Appcast sell recruitment traffic on a cost per applicant basis. An eCPA is the effective CPA, and that is exclusively a metric where you are measuring. It's basically synonymous with the metric definition of cost per applicant. You're saying how much does it cost to generate an applicant from some type of recruitment media, even if I pay for that media as a duration-based posting or on a cost per click or along those lines. It's basically a calculation of what your cost is going to be.
Great. And with that, we're going to wrap up the webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. Keep an eye out for our reports, the slides, and the recording this week. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.